"Mrs. Carver, excuse me. There's a crane on my driveway and it's cracking my concrete. Could you have it moved, please?" She turned and looked me up and down. "Your driveway is the closest flat surface. Deal with it. It's my property." "Your property," she laughed. "Look at you. Work boots, dirty truck. You're a government nobody who got lucky with a mortgage. People like you don't tell people like me what to do. I'm just asking. 3 families before you asked. They're gone." She walked away without looking back. She had no idea who she was talking to or what one phone call was about to cost her. Number, how it started. The house I bought wasn't the biggest on the block. It wasn't the newest or the most expensive. It was the one with the garage. I'm Nate Callahan, 41 years old, Chief Building Official of Williamson County, Texas. That title sounds like a lot for a man behind a desk, but I don't sit behind a desk. I run the department that decides whether buildings in this county stand up or get torn down. Every residential permit, every commercial inspection, every stop work order, every occupancy certificate, all of it flows through my office before it reaches a construction site. I've been doing this for 16 years, the last 5 as chief. Before that, I was a field inspector, and before that, a structural engineer in private practice. I still hold my PE license, number 127,804, because you don't let a credential like that expire just because you switch to the enforcement side. I've reviewed thousands of buildings. I've shut down hundreds. I've seen framing so bad it would fold in a moderate breeze, and connections so undersized they belonged in a dollhouse. I know what a sound building looks like, and I know what one looks like when someone is cutting every corner and betting their customers won't notice until it's too late. I don't advertise any of this. My neighbors know I work for the county. Most assume I do something with permits, which is technically accurate, the way saying a surgeon does something with knives is technically accurate. I drive a Ford F-250 with no county markings. I wear work boots most days and spend my weekends building furniture in a garage workshop that's better organized than some laboratories I've inspected. My wife Jenna says I notice things that don't need noticing. The hairline crack in a restaurant ceiling beam. The anchor bolt spacing on a playground that should be 4 feet but measures 6. She's right. My brain doesn't look at a building and see walls. It sees loads, connections, bearing points, and the 1,000 quiet decisions that determine whether something survives or collapses. We moved to Ridgecrest Meadows 4 years ago. 220 homes north of Round Rock, earth-tone stucco, builder-grade landscaping, the kind of neighborhood where every third house has the same floor plan flipped left to right. Jenna picked it for the school district. My son Owen picked it for the cul-de-sac. I picked it for the garage, 24x28, insulated with a separate electrical panel and a concrete floor I sealed the first weekend. I turned it into a woodworking shop within a month. Miter saw, table saw, drill press, a workbench I built from laminated maple. On weekends, Owen, 7 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with lizards, hands me clamps and pretends to read the tape measure. Last spring we built a birdhouse together. He painted it blue and we mounted it on a cedar post near the side yard fence. The wrens moved in within a week, and Owen checked it every morning before school like a landlord inspecting a rental. The driveway mattered more than people think. 12 feet wide, 42 feet long, smooth concrete with a gentle crown for drainage. For a man with a workshop and a work truck, a driveway isn't decoration, it's infrastructure. I kept it clean, sealed it annually, and once spent an entire Saturday filling a hairline shrinkage crack with epoxy because I couldn't stop looking at it. Jenna said I was being ridiculous. I told her shrinkage cracks become structural cracks if you ignore them. She said I was still being ridiculous, but brought me iced tea anyway. The lot next to ours, Lot 93, was vacant when we moved in, a flat, graded half-acre of packed caliche with orange survey stakes poking out of the dirt like birthday candles on a cake nobody wanted. Owen used to ride his bike along the edge of it, looping between the stakes like a tiny slalom course. I didn't think much about the vacant lot until the morning I looked out my kitchen window and saw a backhoe sitting on it. But first, you need to understand who was running this neighborhood, because none of what follows will make sense otherwise. Number the queen of Ridgecrest Meadows, Brenda Carver, had been HOA president of Ridgecrest Meadows for 4 years by the time the backhoe appeared. She'd won the seat unopposed, not because she was qualified, but because nobody else wanted the job. Brenda wanted it the way some people want a corner table at a restaurant everyone's trying to get into. Not for the meal, but for the confirmation that they deserve it. She was 39 and looked like she'd been assembled by a team of specialists. High cheekbones, flawless skin, the kind of jawline a plastic surgeon keeps as a reference photo. Her hair was always blown out, honey blonde with caramel highlights that cost more per session than most people's car payments. She was tall, slim, and carried herself with the posture of a woman who had practiced walking in heels until the sound itself became a statement. She was, by any objective measure, stunning, the kind of beautiful that makes you forget she's being terrible to you until about 30 seconds after she walks away, when the charm wears off like Novocaine. She dressed like she was permanently en route to a charity gala that didn't exist. Sunglasses, designer belts, silk blouses that probably had their own dry cleaner. She carried a designer handbag to board meetings the way a general carries a sidearm, not because she needed what was inside, but because it told everyone in the room exactly where they stood relative to her, which was below. She drove a pearl-white luxury SUV, piloted by a woman whose most demanding daily task was deciding which shade of lipstick projected the right authority for a Tuesday. She also ran a modest lifestyle social media account under a name like Brenda Curates, with a bio describing her as a community aesthetic director, curating excellence one subdivision at a time. She posted from board meetings with captions like "Governance is glamour," photographed in a wrap dress behind a lectern, in a community center that smelled like floor wax and microwaved lasagna. The gap between the image and the room was breathtaking. Her husband, Mitchell Carver, ran a small residential construction company. Mitchell was the quiet one. He showed up at barbecues, shook hands, nursed a single beer for 3 hours, and stood behind Brenda with the posture of a man professionally trained to hold shopping bags and agree. If Brenda was the face of the operation, Mitchell was the receipt, technically part of the transaction, but not something anyone wanted to look at twice. The first time I met Brenda, she showed up at our door the week after we moved in. She stepped out of her SUV in white linen pants, a silk camisole and designer sandals, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She surveyed our moving boxes, our unfinished lawn, and my work boots by the door the way a museum curator might discover a stranger wandering into a private gallery. Brenda Carver, HOA president, welcome to Ridgecrest. She handed me a compliance binder thick enough to stop a bullet. You'll want to review the architectural guidelines before you make any changes to the exterior. We take curb appeal very seriously here. She said curb appeal, the way a surgeon says anesthesia, like something that could hurt you if handled by the wrong person. She looked past me into the hallway, then at my boots, then at my truck. Is the truck going to stay visible from the street? It's my work truck. It stays in the driveway. We do have standards for vehicle appearance. She pulled a form from her purse. She kept forms in there and handed it to me with a pen. Also, please sign the landscaping maintenance agreement. We've had issues with new homeowners letting their Bermuda exceed 3.5 inches. Jenna appeared behind me. We just got here. The sod hasn't even settled. Brenda looked at Jenna the way a fashion editor looks at someone wearing last season's boots, not with anger, but with pity. The cruelest kind of condescension, the kind that smiles while it diminishes you. That's exactly when problems start. She clicked her pen, turned on one heel, and walked back to her car. The heel left a perfect round dent in our fresh Bermuda. That night, lying in bed, Jenna said, she measured the grass. What? While she was walking back to her car, she bent down and held something against the lawn. I think it was a ruler from her purse. She keeps a ruler in her purse. Apparently she keeps everything in there except a conscience. Number governance by intimidation. Over the next 4 years, I learned that Brenda's management style was simple. Compliance through glamorous intimidation. She sent more fine notices than any president in the neighborhood's history, and she delivered each one with the serene authority of a woman who genuinely believed she was doing you a favor by correcting your taste. $200 for a basketball hoop visible from common areas. $150 for a garden flag that exceeded approved dimensions by 7/8 of an inch. Measured with a jeweled caliper, she produced from her purse at the compliance hearing like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. $300 for unapproved exterior paint. The homeowner had used semi-gloss instead of satin on his front door trim. Brenda brought a gloss meter to the hearing, held it against the door frame, read the number aloud, and shook her head with the wounded disappointment of a woman who'd expected better from humanity. Nobody challenged her, because challenging Brenda meant challenging the board, and the board was Brenda. She'd stacked it over 4 years with people who owed her favors or feared her attention. Mitchell's business partner held the treasurer's seat. Her Pilates instructor was secretary. The remaining 2 seats were filled by homeowners who attended meetings the way some people attend jury duty, with visible discomfort and a profound desire to be elsewhere. The Gwynns on Ridgeline Court found out how it worked when they installed a backyard pergola. Brenda measured it the day after the footings were poured, walking into their yard while they were at work, and issued a $300 fine for an unauthorized permanent structure. The pergola was 8 feet tall. The covenants allowed 10. But Brenda told them contesting it would trigger a full property compliance audit, described with a smile that suggested she'd enjoy every minute of it. They paid. Cal Rodriguez told me that story on a Saturday morning while we were both pulling weeds. Cal was 71, a retired county records clerk who kept meticulous notes on everything. He said it quietly, the way you share intelligence behind enemy lines. She runs this place like a fashion label, he said, and everyone who lives here is an unpaid intern who can't afford to quit. I didn't say anything. I was still new. I didn't know yet that Cal was building a spreadsheet. I didn't know yet that I'd need it. Number the lot comes alive. The backhoe was followed by a grading crew. The next morning, 6 men spread across lot 93 with survey equipment and a small excavator, carving out a foundation footprint twice the size of any house on the block. A construction sign appeared at the curb. Carver Development Group, Custom Home Construction, Mitchell Carver, General Contractor. Brenda's husband was building a house next to mine. At the next board meeting, Brenda unveiled the project like a new handbag collection, standing at the lectern in a tailored emerald dress, pointing to a rendering on foam board. A two-story Mediterranean villa that looked airlifted from a coastal hillside and dropped into a neighborhood of single-story ranch homes. She called it a flagship property and an investment in our community's visual identity. She used the phrase aesthetic elevation 3 times. A homeowner named Paul Kessler raised his hand. How tall is it going to be? 2 stories, 32 feet to the ridge, within county code. She smiled the keynote smile, the one that shows teeth but communicates nothing warmer than a cease and desist letter. That's taller than every house here. It's also going to raise property values by at least 6%. She looked at him the way you look at someone asking to see the dessert menu at a steakhouse, technically allowed, but revealing. Any other questions? Good. Construction moved fast. Foundation walls went up in 2 weeks. The lot became a constant haze of diesel exhaust, nail gun percussion, and trucks backing through a residential street never designed for commercial traffic. I dealt with it. Construction is temporary. Noise fades. I bought earplugs for Owen and adjusted my schedule around the worst hours. Then the crane arrived. Number the crane. I was pulling into my driveway on a Wednesday afternoon when I saw it. A 60-ton mobile crane, bright yellow, parked on my driveway. Not near it on it. The chassis straddled the center line of my concrete, and 3 of its 4 outrigger pads were deployed on the surface, one resting on the lawn strip along the property line. The left outrigger pad had already cracked the concrete, a fracture running from under the steel plate toward the garage, straight through 4 years of sealed, maintained surface. The operator was eating a sandwich in the cab. Maybe 25, faded safety vest, no hard hat. Hey, this is my driveway, you can't park here. He looked confused. The lady said this was HOA property, said we had access. What lady? Real pretty. White SUV, dressed like she was going to a party. I walked over to the construction site. Brenda stood near the foundation wall in cream slacks and a silk blouse, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, her heels sinking into the construction dirt without her seeming to notice or care. Mitchell stood 3 feet behind her, holding a clipboard she'd apparently handed him, because that's what Mitchell did. Brenda, there's a 60-ton crane on my driveway. She turned slowly, the way a queen turns when a servant has spoken without being addressed. Nate, the crane needs a staging area. The lot doesn't have enough room for the equipment and materials. Your driveway is the closest flat surface. It's my driveway. It's not construction access. The HOA approved temporary use of adjacent surfaces for community development projects. Section 11.4. There is no Section 11.4 that covers putting a crane on my private property. She tilted her sunglasses down and looked at me over the rims, with the quiet amusement of a woman who's been told she's wrong exactly twice in her adult life and found it charming both times. I'd suggest you review the updated Community Development Addendum. It was distributed last month. I never received an addendum. Then check your email. She paused, adjusted her bag, and added the line I'd hear her use on at least 4 other homeowners before this was over. We're all making sacrifices for the good of the community, Nate. I'd hate for this to become an issue. She said, issue, the way a surgeon says complication, like something that would hurt me more than it would hurt her. Mitchell stood behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. He didn't say a word. I looked at him long enough that he should have felt it. He never looked up. That told me everything about who ran that household, and everything about who ran that construction project. I walked back to my driveway and knelt beside the crack. 18 inches, clean and sharp. The kind of split you get when a point load exceeds the compressive strength of the slab. Residential concrete is rated for roughly 3,000 pounds per square foot. The crane's outrigger was applying something closer to 30,000, 10 times the design load. The crane stayed until Friday. When it left, I photographed the damage from 6 angles and measured the crack at 22 inches. I searched every HOA email from the past year. No community development addendum. No section 11.4. No vote. No record of any resolution granting construction access to private property. I opened the covenants, all 63 pages. Section 8.2 covered temporary construction activity on common areas during board-approved projects. Common areas, not private driveways. My property appeared nowhere in it. Brenda had invented a rule. She'd done it the way she did everything, beautifully, confidently, without a hair out of place. She'd bet I wouldn't check. Most people don't. Most people hear a citation from a woman who looks like she stepped out of a glossy catalog and assume it must be real, because surely someone that polished wouldn't lie about something that specific. I'm not most people. I read building codes, legal descriptions, and structural specifications every day of my professional life, and I know what fabricated authority looks like. The numbers don't lie. I sent a formal email to the board with photographs, requesting no future equipment be placed on my property. Brenda replied to the full board, CCing me. The crane staging was approved under the board's general authority to facilitate community improvement projects. No individual homeowner approval is required. No section number, no bylaw reference, just general authority, a phrase that means whatever the person using it needs it to mean. The crane came back Monday. The third outrigger crushed my irrigation riser. Water sprayed across the concrete. My driveway now had 3 crack zones. I called Mitchell directly. Your crane is destroying my concrete. Nate, I understand it's temporary. The lot's tight. You don't have an easement. The HOA doesn't have authority to grant one. Brenda handles the community side. Talk to her. I've talked to her. She cited rules that don't exist. He was quiet. I'll try to keep the crane off your side when I can. Then he hung up. A man who runs a construction company had just told me to discuss a construction dispute with his wife. The next board meeting drew 41 homeowners. I stood during open comment with photographs and a repair estimate, $4,200. My driveway has been used as a staging area for a crane servicing a project owned by the HOA president's husband. The authorization she cited, Section 11.4, doesn't exist. I'm requesting a board vote prohibiting equipment staging on private property without written consent. Brenda leaned into her microphone, wearing a white sheath dress for the occasion. The board appreciates your input. However, the Lot 93 project is a significant investment in our community's property values. Temporary inconveniences are part of development. I'm not asking for a statement. I'm asking for a vote. The board sets the agenda, not individual homeowners. She said it gently, the way a kindergarten teacher regrets a child who's tried to eat the paste. The cruelty was in the kindness. Cal Rodriguez stood up. That lot's been under construction 3 months and they're not through framing. Your August deadline is fiction. The meeting ended without a vote. My request was tabled. Afterward, Cal caught me in the parking lot with a folded printout. She's funneling dues money into Mitchell's project. There's a line item called Community Enhancement Reserve that didn't exist before October. $47,000 moved into it, paid directly to Carver Development Group as site preparation fees. He'd cross-referenced the payments with the county assessor's database. The lot was owned by an LLC that was, in fact, Mitchell's company. She's using community dues to subsidize her husband's construction project and calling it enhancement, Cal said. It's the kind of accounting that would make an auditor blush. That night, I sat with the covenants open on my laptop, looking for a mechanism, some provision that would force the board to act. But the documents were written for disputes about fence heights and lawn maintenance, not for a president who treated governing rules like suggestions she could edit between Pilates sessions. The mechanism I needed wasn't in the covenants. It was sitting in my briefcase, the same one I carry to the office every morning, the office where I run the county building department. I just hadn't connected the two yet. Number 14 ways to fail. The crane came back twice more in April. Each visit cracked fresh concrete. Updated repair estimate, $6,800. On the last day of the month, I came home to find the crane's boom swung over my property line, its counterweight hanging directly above the corner of my garage. The operator was lifting a steel beam, rotating the boom over my roof to reach the far side of the lot. A beam weighing over 2 tons, hanging 40 feet above my garage, my workshop, Owen's half-finished lizard terrarium. I walked to the cab. "You're swinging loads over my structure. Do you have a lift plan?" He stared. "A what?" "Load, weight, boom angle, swing radius, ground bearing pressure, proximity to structures. You need all of it before you swing a load over an occupied building." Lady said we had clearance. The lady isn't a licensed engineer, and she isn't an OSHA compliance officer. I am, on the other hand, well aware of what you're violating right now. No lift plan, no outrigger mats, no signal person. That's a shutdown. He set the beam down and retracted the boom. The crane didn't cross my property line again that day. That evening, I stood in the garage doorway and looked at the frame rising too fast on the other side of the fence. From 40 feet away, even in fading light, I could see things that made my stomach tighten. The headers over the first-floor windows were undersized, single lumber, where a 2-story load path required doubled framing. The steel beam at center span had no gusset plates at the column connections, just resting on a post with what looked like a single bolt. The roof trusses were spaced too far apart, and the hurricane ties, the metal connectors that anchor every truss to the top plate, weren't there. No ties, no clips, just toe-nailed connections, a method that hasn't been code compliant in decades. The irony nearly knocked the wind out of me. A woman who measured her neighbor's grass to the quarter-inch, who fined people for the sheen of their paint, whose husband was building a structure with over a dozen visible code violations. She curated neighborhood excellence online and funded structural negligence at home. I spent 3 evenings on my porch documenting every deficiency visible from my own property, never crossing the lot line. Undersized headers, missing hurricane ties at nearly every visible connection, no gusset plates at the steel beam, truss spacing out of compliance, foundation rebar spacing out of compliance, 14 structural deficiencies. This wasn't a technicality. This was negligence. Someone would buy this house. Someone's kids would sleep in second-floor bedrooms held up by toe-nailed connections and a single bolt. I checked the permit board nailed near the street. Building permit issued the previous October. Project: single-family residential dwelling, 1-story, 24,000 square feet, 1 story. The building rising in front of me was 2 stories. The permit had also expired 3 months earlier. And then something clicked into place, the connection that should have been obvious from the start. I am the chief building official of Williamson County. This building on this lot, under this specific expired permit, falls under my department's jurisdiction. Every permit Mitchell Carver ever filed passed through my office. The woman who'd fabricated a bylaw to park a crane on my driveway had spent 4 years terrorizing a neighborhood with fake rules, while her husband was violating every real rule that existed. And the man she dismissed as just another homeowner was the person who enforced those real rules for the entire county. She'd never bothered to ask what I did for a living. She'd been too busy measuring grass. Number the call. I couldn't personally inspect a project next to my own home. That would be a conflict of interest, and unlike Brenda, I understand what those are. But I could file a formal complaint through proper channels as a licensed engineer, and I could call my deputy, Robert Torres, and tell him exactly what needed to happen. I wrote the complaint over 3 days. 6 pages, single-spaced. Expired permit, deviation from approved plans, 14 structural deficiencies, absence of an engineer of record, and crane operations conducted without OSHA-compliant safety protocols. 37 photographs, each dated and annotated, referenced against specific code sections. That evening Jenna came out to the porch with iced tea. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you stare at a building and calculate how many ways it can fail. 14 that I can see from here." She looked at the construction, then at me. "When are you making the call?" "I need the crane back one more time. Right now it's a permit complaint and a structural report. If the crane comes onto my property again, it's also a property damage claim, an OSHA violation, and a trespass. One call covers all of it, but only if everything is happening at the same time. You've been planning this since the first crack. I've been planning this since she measured our grass on moving day." The crane came back on a Tuesday morning in May. Same crane, same operator, no hard hat. The outriggers went down without hesitation. The left pad drove straight through an existing crack. I heard the concrete split from inside the house. I walked outside. The driveway wasn't damaged anymore, it was destroyed. The center section had collapsed into the subbase, broken into 8 irregular pieces. An Owens birdhouse post, near the side yard fence, was leaning at 45 degrees. A construction truck had clipped it backing through the easement. The blue birdhouse hung sideways, entrance hole pointed at the sky. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my briefcase. The complaint was already written. I called Robert. "It's Nate. I'm filing a formal complaint on the Lot 93 project. Permits expired since January. The build deviates substantially from the approved plans. It's a 2-story going up on a 1-story permit. I've documented 14 structural deficiencies from the adjacent property, and there's a crane on my driveway right now with multiple OSHA violations. I'm recusing myself. This is your inspection, but I need someone out here today. Full scope, foundation to framing." Robert was quiet for a moment. He'd worked for me long enough to know that when I say 14 deficiencies, I mean 14, documented and cross-referenced. "I'll be there in 2 hours, he said. "I'm calling OSHA on the way." Number the inspection. Robert's truck pulled onto the street just after 1 in the afternoon, followed by Sandra Wells, the OSHA compliance officer he'd called on the drive over. I met them on the sidewalk and handed over the complaint and photographs. Robert spread the approved plans on the hood of his truck and looked at the 2-story structure rising over the fence line. "The permit was for a 1-story, 24,000-square-foot residence," he said slowly. "This is not that." He walked onto the lot and began working through it systematically, foundation, framing, connections, while Sandra Wells headed straight for the crane, still parked and running on my driveway. Mitchell arrived 30 minutes in, summoned by a panicked foreman, and sat behind the wheel of his truck for a full minute before getting out. Watching a county inspector methodically document 4 months of work with a tape measure and a clipboard. Brenda arrived 10 minutes after him. She stepped out of her SUV in a silk blouse, bag on one arm, phone in the other hand, and walked straight to Robert with the stride of a woman who'd never met a situation she couldn't manage with confidence and accessories. "What's going on here? This is a board-approved community development project." Robert looked at her without expression. "The building department doesn't answer to HOA boards, ma'am. We answer to the building code." Something flickered behind her eyes, the recognition that she was standing in a room where her usual tools didn't work. "I'm going to call the county commissioner's office," she said, reaching for her phone. "You're welcome to," Robert said, already walking toward the foundation wall. He didn't look back. I don't think anyone had ever not looked back at Brenda Carver before. Sandra Wells shut the crane down within 40 minutes. The operator couldn't produce a certification card or a lift plan. She cited 4 OSHA violations and issued an impoundment order. The crane couldn't leave my driveway under its own power until the violations were resolved. It had been parked there without permission, and now it was stuck there by federal order. Robert's inspection documented 17 structural violations, 3 more than I'd found. Expired permit, unauthorized deviation from plans, no engineer of record, a 2-story custom home with steel beams, built on an expired 1-story permit with no PE stamp anywhere in the file. The foundation also violated the required side setback along my property line by over 2 feet. Brenda watched from the street, phone pressed to her ear, calling people who couldn't help her. Her expression cycled through confusion, frustration, and something that might have been the earliest stage of fear. For the first time since I'd moved to Ridgecrest Meadows, she did not look like she was in control. Robert posted the stop work order at 3:17 that afternoon. All work ceased immediately. Number what it cost. I stood on my broken driveway and watched the crew pack up. The foreman walked past me. "You the one who called?" "I'm the one who called." He looked at the cracked concrete, then the stop work tag. "She told us the driveway was HOA property. Told us the permits were squared away. She told you a lot of things. She's convincing. Pretty woman like that talks like she knows what she's talking about." A lot of people believed her. That's how it worked. The consequences arrived quickly, the way they always do once someone's been building on nothing. The county fined Mitchell $31,000 for unpermitted construction and structural violations, and suspended his contractor's license pending review. The buyer under contract, who'd put down $80,000 in earnest money, backed out within the week and got a full refund. OSHA fined the crane rental company $47,200. The crane company, in turn, filed a claim against Carver Development Group for false site access information. And because the deviations were too extensive to remediate, the county ordered the structure demolished. Mitchell would have to tear it all down, submit new plans with an engineer's stamp, and start from nothing, an estimated $62,000 job. Total damage across permits, fines, demolition, the lost sale, and OSHA penalties, north of $340,000. The demolition crew took the building down in 4 days. When they finished, Lot 93 looked exactly as it had when we'd moved in, a flat half-acre of packed dirt and orange survey stakes. Owen looked through the kitchen window. "The birthday cake is back." He didn't know about the permits or the violations or the $340,000. He just knew the noisy lot was quiet again and his bike slalom course was open. That was enough for a 7-year-old. It should have been enough for everyone. Number the reckoning. The crane was removed 3 days after the stop work order, once the OSHA paperwork cleared. My driveway was worse than the initial estimate suggested. The center section rubble, the edges shifted, the subbase contaminated with hydraulic fluid. Full replacement, $7,400. Mitchell's insurance paid it without argument. The adjuster reviewed my documentation, thorough enough to make a forensic engineer nod, and cut a check within 3 weeks. I repaired the driveway myself on a Saturday in July. New base compacted properly, rebar spaced tighter than code requires, because that's how I build. Owen helped screed the surface, too light to make a real difference, but he held the board and said, "Smooth, Daddy," every time I made a pass. Jenna took a photo of us on the cured slab the next morning. Owen's boot prints, size 2, sat near the edge before the sealer went on. I didn't fill them in. The driveway was only the beginning of what unraveled. Cal Rodriguez delivered his findings to every mailbox in the neighborhood 2 days after the stop work order, 8 pages, single-spaced, with appendices. The Community Enhancement Reserve was a slush fund. $47,000 of HOA dues paid directly to Carver Development Group for Mitchell's spec house, plus another $11,000 in consulting fees, paid to a sole proprietorship registered to Brenda herself. She'd been paying herself out of the HOA's budget for 2 years. Total misappropriated, $58,000. The woman who fined families for paint sheen and grass height had been stealing from the community she claimed to curate. The emergency homeowner meeting drew 94 people. Cal ran it because Brenda refused to attend. Her house stayed dark all evening. The motion to remove her as HOA president passed 89-5. A new board was elected within the month, Paul Kessler as president, Cal Rodriguez as treasurer, a new secretary, and the first thing they did was open the books to every homeowner. Transparency, it turns out, doesn't require a fashion sense. The new board filed a civil suit against Brenda and Mitchell for breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. It settled 6 months later for the full amount plus legal fees. They sold their house that August and moved to a subdivision I heard doesn't have an HOA. The new board also reviewed every fine levied during Brenda's tenure. 71 had been based on provisions never properly ratified by the homeowners. Resolutions passed without the required vote. The Gwynns got their $300 back. Paul Kessler's curb repair got covered. 14 other families received refunds for fines they'd paid without complaint, too afraid to push back against a woman who could ruin your month with a clipboard. My own refund check came to $263. I used it on lumber for Owen's next project, a bookshelf to hold his field guides and one blue birdhouse that needed a new home, now that the wrens had moved on for winter. We built it on a Saturday. I cut the joints. He sanded the edges. Jenna watched from the doorway with her coffee. The birdhouse sat on the top shelf, entrance hole facing the window. Owen said the wrens would find it again in spring. I told him they would. Good construction always gets noticed. Last month I was in the garage working on some floating shelves when Owen came in with something behind his back, the gap-toothed grin. He held out a piece of cedar sanded smooth, with careful, crooked letters burned into the wood. Callahan Workshop Est, 2020. For the door, he said, so people know who built this. I mounted it that afternoon, level and square, right above the garage door handle, exactly where it belonged. Outside, the driveway was smooth and clean. The cul-de-sac was quiet. Lot 93 sat empty again, its survey stakes standing in the dirt like small monuments to a project that never should have started. Some things you build once, and they last, the sign, the driveway, the birdhouse on the top shelf, And the lesson underneath all of it: designer authority only works until someone checks the building code. A closing thought on all of it. Brenda Carver didn't lose because she was wrong about one bylaw. She lost because she'd built her entire authority on the assumption that nobody would ever check the footnotes. She'd measured her neighbors' lawns down to the inch, and never once thought to ask what the quiet man in work boots actually did for a living. Most people in Nate's position would have kept arguing at board meetings, kept sending emails, kept paying fines for rules that didn't exist. He didn't. He stopped arguing on her terms and started operating on his, read the code, checked the permit, documented everything from his own property line, and let the system do exactly what it was built to do for someone who'd actually done the homework.